Welcome back. I wanted to talk to you briefly about Chet Campenella. He's an 86-year-old gentleman who got two bills pushed through and actually has them in Congress. It's regarding the mistreatment of Italian Americans during the Second World War. But the interesting thing is that it took him some time to move these forward. And I wanted to share with you two things. One, a podcast we did with him a while back where he explains the nature of what he did and how long it took and how he got it done. So I won't tell you that now. I'll just let you listen to the podcast, which we'll link below. And additionally, we have some footage of him speaking publicly where he talks about the importance of what he's doing and kind of a little bit of the background. So let me just go forward. We'll play the video. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
My name is Chet Campenella, 86 years of age, born and raised in San Jose. I lived through these horrible happenings. I remember them well. So really, I feel that I'm qualified to be here today and to address you on this topic. My story, I will try to make it as detailed as possible, but they're only going to give me 20 minutes to talk, so I'll have to make it fast. Anyway, to start off with, the Italian enemy aliens were forced to endure a curfew. I remember the curfew times would be from 8 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock in the morning. That would be every night. And that meant that if any Italian enemy alien, and that included my mother and father, were found to be out of their homes during these hours, they could be apprehended, arrested, and put in jail. Then we go on to tell you that the Italian enemy aliens were made to abide by a travel restriction. Okay, we were not allowed to travel more than a 5-mile radius from our home for any reason whatsoever. Okay, so in that respect, my mother and father were quite fortunate in that they worked for Tri-Valley Cannery, which was located only 7 blocks from our home. So they were able to continue working and at least earn enough money to feed the family and to take care of our cares. On the other side of the coin, let me cite the example of Mr. Giuseppe DiMaggio. You might not remember him, but you remember his son, a young man that played center field for the New York Yankees. Well, Mr. Giuseppe DiMaggio and his family owned DiMaggio's restaurant, which was located on the wharf in San Francisco. But being that he lived more than 5 miles away from his restaurant, guess what? Our government forbid him from either visiting his restaurant or from working there. Then we go on to tell you about the Italian enemy aliens who were forced to go to their local post office, and ours was right across the street from St. James Park in San Jose. And what they were made to do, with the help of an interpreter, they filled out forms, after which they were fingerprinted, and after which they were photographed. When this process was over with, they would be given enemy alien little booklets that they were forced to carry on their person at all time for identification purposes. Now, our home were searched by the FBI. Our home, for instance, was searched on 2 different occasions, and what the FBI would be looking for would be signaling devices, such as, we'll say, radios, shortwave radios, could be cameras, flashlights, banners, flags, or guns. Now, if any of these were found, they would do one of 2 things with them, I remember. They would either destroy them on their property or confiscate them, never to be returned. Now, our home was searched on 2 different occasions, but on one prior occasion, I got word through a neighbor that the men with the blue suits would be in the area and they would be searching. So anyway, we were having lunch and the doorbell rang, and I told my mother and father, let me handle this thing. And I was 12 years old at the time. So I answered the door, but I kept the screen door latched. And yeah, the 2 men in their blue suits identified themselves as FBI agents, and they told me that they were there to search our home. No way was I going to let them in. So anyway, I told them, I told them a little lie. My mother and father are out shopping. They won't be back for about an hour. And you're going to have to come back later because I was taught never to let strangers in the house. With that, I slammed the door and waited until they left. Then I went into the kitchen where my dad was eating. And I told him what had transpired. And so he said, oh, just a moment. So he goes on top of the refrigerator. And I think it was a refrigerator, either that or an ice box, I've forgotten. And he gets his majestic radio, comes to the table, and then he goes in his bedroom and gets his .22 revolver, brings him out, and he wraps him up in newspaper. And I said, I don't understand. He says, well, just a minute, help me carry him. So we go out through the back porch, through the yard, and we go into the chicken coop. And he had a large container there, and he would use it to store chicken feed, usually wheat. So anyway, he takes some of it out and he goes ahead and submerses both of these articles in there, puts some more wheat on top of it, and he puts a lid on it. So anyway, they did come back that afternoon, believe it or not. And but they didn't search that far, so those two items are at least safe until their next visit. You received fighting against the Germans. Okay, then we go on to tell you about the 10,000 Italian enemy aliens living in oceanside communities. Our government decided to make these communities strategic areas off limits to all Italian enemy aliens. So that meant that these people had to board up their homes and they were forced to evacuate. Now, when they were forced to evacuate, they would be evacuated sometimes 5 miles away, 10 miles, 20 miles, as far east as the Nevada border. Now, they were made to fend for themselves. No compensation on their move from the government at all. So, if they were lucky enough to have friends or family in these areas, fine. If not, they were in for hard times. Now, the reason for that is that if they went out and looked for a menial job, they would be told by the employer, sorry, I do not hire Italians. If they went out looking for just a shack to live in, they would be told by the landlord, I'm sorry, I do not rent to Italians. My mother and dad made me aware of some of their friends that came back after the war, telling them that they were forced to live in conditions not too much better than living in a chicken coop. Now we go on to something that people don't know about. There were 1,000, at least 1,000, we'll say 100 to 1,000 Italian enemy aliens who were arrested by the FBI or the Army and interned in internment camps during World War II. Now, you ask me, what type of a person would be arrested and interned? Well, it would be an Italian enemy alien who happened to be, we'll say, the editor of an Italian newspaper. The one I remember is one that was called L'Italia. It was a daily Italian newspaper. Secondly, it might have been one of my professors or teachers that were Italian that taught me how to speak a little better Italian after school. It was called dopo scuola. Then it might possibly be, my dad and others who actually were presidents of the Italian lodges. Then it might also be people who actually served in the military for Italy during World War I. My dad was one of those. Or it might be another person who they thought might be, let's say, pro-fascist, or another that they thought might show sympathy towards Italy. Now, they had one problem here. Where were they going to house these people? Well, they had an internment camp up at Fort Myers, which was up in Maryland. Then they had another one at Fort Lincoln, North Dakota. Another one, Fort McAllister, I believe, in Oklahoma. Would you believe they even had an internment camp for these Italians up in Canada? Then there's another one at Crystal City, Texas. Now the largest was at Fort Missoula, Montana. Now this is where the Japanese were interned. Next to the Japanese, the Italians were interned. Next to the Italians, Germans. There were, in fact, I even remember the number, 10,905 German citizens that were interned. Next to them, the Latin American Jews from Peru, and next to them, Latin American Japanese from Peru. People don't know about that. Now, I had an uncle who was arrested right in front of me, but he and I would go to Sacramento, and I would face myself, and he would sit next to me, the Senate Rules Committee, and I was to give them a 35-minute talk on strictly the mistreatment of the Italians during World War II. I agreed to do that, providing that that day the senators would take a vote and vote in favor of giving us Italian American survivors a formal public apology on behalf of the state of California. I gave them my testimony. Then I was really surprised. Senate Pro Tem, he's the president of the senators, Gerald Steinberg said, "Mr. Campenella," he said, "take a rest, take a 5-minute rest. I got to talk to the senator." He talks to the senators, and guess what? He comes back to me and said, "Mr. Campenella," he said, "I'm sorry to say this, but until you gave us that testimony, there's not one of the senators, including myself, that knew anything about these horrible happenings." And I told him at that point, I want you to vote on it, and vote on it now. They voted 100% in favor. Then they told me that, well, we weren't finished then. You know how the government goes. Another testimony has to be given to the assembly. Fine. And that was done, and then the assembly voted on it. And guess what? They voted 64-0 in favor of our asking for the formal public apology on behalf of the state of California. So the date that I gave the testimony was June 23rd, 2010. Believe it or not, on August 20th, 2010, we received our formal public apology on behalf of the state of California. They sent me a document, and they did publish it in every major newspaper, or most of them, in the United States. So I was real grateful for that. Now at this time, for the last 4, 5, 10, 20, 18 years, I've been trying to get a formal public apology on behalf of our United States government. So I got a hold of my Congress lady, nice lady, Zoe Lawford. I think we all know her. And I'm indebted to her and always be thankful for her. She said, "Chet, I know what you want. Now, if you will go ahead and write up 2 bills in layman's terms and deliver them to my office, I will make sure that I will put them in congressional language so that they'll understand it, and we'll come out with the 2 bills." I did what I was supposed to do. She did what she was supposed to do. So guess what? On March 23rd of this year, she presented our 2 bills to Congress. She introduced them to Congress. One bill is H.R. 1706, and in that I'm asking for $3 million in grants from our Secretary of Education to be used strictly for teaching the American public about the mistreatment of the Italians, the Germans, the Japanese, the Latin American Jews, Latin American Japanese during World War II. Secondly, RH 1707, I'm asking for a formal public apology on behalf of the United States government. It's going slow. both of these bills are now in committee. And I'm having a tough time with Robert Galati, who is actually president of the Judicial Committee. That's where 1707 is. And then for Virginia Fox, she is head of the 1706 committee. But anyway, what I can do here now is to ask you, as my friends, for instance, to get a hold of your congressman at your convenience, or congress lady, and tell them that, hey, we got 2 bills there before Congress, but they're in committee. We want those 2 bills taken out of committee, brought to the House floor so that they could be voted on. So what can you do to help us to get it to that stage? So anyway, that's pretty much it. In ending, I would like to say that I think we just have to keep the word going, because we've got to educate our public as to all of these mistreatments by different nationalities. I have spoken to possibly maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people on this subject. Now, what I find disturbing is that of all the people I talk to, less than 3% have any knowledge of these mistreatments and injustices. And that I find to be unacceptable. Now, at this time, I would like to thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me. Part of it, I hope, was educational. Part of it could have been boring, but that's okay. I want you to go home and tell your children, family, exactly what I talked about. So, in ending, I would like to say God bless all of you, and God bless America.
Well, I hope that was interesting and at least gave you some insight into what it takes. The thing I think that's important is that Chet is still looking for support, because he wants to move these forward. He wants to get them out of committee. And the only way that can happen is if there's a lot of support from people like you who are willing to vote on his debate, leave comments, and let him know that you support him. Otherwise, it's a sole venture. So for particularly Italian Americans who are concerned about their past, this is a great and very simple opportunity and a way for you to express your support by going in, voting to support, leaving comments, and sharing this with more of your community. The only way that Congress will move this forward is if there is enough support, really, to make this happen. And I know Chet would really appreciate it, so hopefully we can move that forward. So I hope you enjoyed the video and the podcast, and feel free to leave comments below. This is John Tebow with iLobby. Thanks for watching.